on the News Channel 5 network. This is Score on Business.
Hey, welcome to Score on Business. I'm Pete Hendricks, a serial entrepreneur, and your host for today. A lot of prospective entrepreneurs aren't sure where to start, and so a great place to start is to go to scorenashville.org. And what you'll find there is that we have low-cost workshops. They're $25 a piece that primarily occur on Saturdays. Again, scorenashville.org, and also counseling available that is at no charge whatever. Then a kind of a tip for this show. In the beginning, the most important actions for any business are finding a product or service that customers will pay for and then getting customers. And business cards, setting up QuickBooks and all that stuff won't matter without these two. So, getting to some content. We have Brian Church is our first guest. Brian Church is co-founder and CEO of Ideashares, the virtual idea incubator. They help entrepreneurs and inventors successfully compress time, cost, risk associated with the early stages of ideation. And also, Brian's written several books here, one of which is The Experience. And we're about to talk about the experience that we're talking about. So, Brian, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Pete.
Yeah, so you're an expert on business relationships. Tell us some fundamentals that people can put to use.
Yeah, I became a student of that, and I try not to call myself an expert in anything, right? So of the knowledge that I have, usually is, well, thank you for that. But it's because of, I like to stand on the shoulders of giants to learn what I have. But I wanted to become a student of this because I realized I'm not a smart man, but I like to look for a cause and effect reason why things work and why things move. And really it was selfish to a point eventually that I came up with relationship momentum and really wanted to become an expert in the relational side of business. And but what I found is that relationships move ideas and endeavors, businesses, companies, products, projects, purposes, okay? It's relationships that move them, not necessarily just technology or anything else for that matter. It is the one most powerful force that will move your company, your invention, your idea forward. And that's why I wanted to become a student of it. And
absolutely. Nothing compares to nothing happens without people.
That's right.
And nothing happens more than with people where the relationships are solid.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you asked for some practical steps. So I wrote a book called Relationship Momentum, and it was the secret behind making ideas move. And what we did is I actually worked with a group of physicists to come up with a equation for relationship momentum. And so before everybody just closes their ears, I failed physics in high school. Okay, so this was about making it simple, not making it difficult. But I found that in the equation that anything multiplied by zero is what? Zero. So you've got to have it all. And I had these three equities that I surrounded it around. And it was the notion of brand equity, value equity, and ambassador equity. And you had to encompass those three things. The brand is about your ethos. It's more than just a logo. The value equity is, what are you actually doing? What is the value proposition? Is it real? And then the ambassador equity side of it is, are people willing to wave your flag for you? Do you have ambassadors, whether you're using social media or what have you? It's the power of the crowd, and are they willing to be your ambassadors? And without the first two, you can't get to the third.
Right.
Put them all together, you have inertia, you have relationship momentum. Yeah.
Tremendous relationship momentum.
That's right.
So tell us about the relational inflection points.
Yeah, so I've consulted over the years and done a lot in recruiting and mergers and acquisitions, and the same thing with Ideashares as we work with entrepreneurs and inventors. There are inflection points on the way to an event. Whatever that event is, I don't care if it's a date, it's getting married, or if it's getting somebody to buy your product, or it's a sale, it's a merger of a company, a liquidation of a company, whatever that is, there's an event that's there, and it takes relationships coming together every single time. It's not an anomaly. This is consistent. It's a constant. And so there's these 5 relational inflection points that I have tried to become a student at measuring. The first one is the impression, which is huge. And it's not just to impress somebody. It actually comes, the root word is the impression comes from, it's science, okay? So it's actually your eye takes an impression when you see something, and it's literally burned into your brain. Same thing when you meet somebody. All right, so that first impression, you've heard that it takes 7 seconds in order to come up with that in the human mind. And you've also heard that there's, you don't get 2 chances to make a first impression. That's true. It's burned into the mind of the person forever. That's the first one. The second one is the promise. So you always have that first opportunity to keep a promise or break a promise. It could be, I'm going to send a follow-up email, I'm going to meet you on time, I'm going to do whatever it was that you said. You have that opportunity to keep that promise, and that's where trust begins to get built and a relationship can be forged. The third thing is when you begin to make that connection, and that's where you have the impression, you have the connection, and then you begin to make, you have the impression, then you have the promise, then you have the connection, where you begin to forge that relationship even further, and the two of you can begin to share. Then the fourth one is actually conflict, and conflict doesn't have to mean a fight. Okay, right. Conflict can be the first time that terms come out. Yeah. And there's some uneasiness, and it's about how you adopt and maneuver through that actually, it can feel like it's tearing it, just like a muscle. It can feel like it's tearing apart, but it actually comes back to forge it. Okay, and if you get on the other side of that conflict, then you have the fifth one, which is consummation. And that's where you're buying into each other. And so, not necessarily consummation on a date or something like that, but in the world of business, as I talk about, it's where, where secrets are then shared. It's where something happens, commerce happens, something is bought, the consummation happens.
Let's come back to conflict, because that is an important one. And so, this show's about for entrepreneurs, and you all focus on entrepreneurs. There are a lot of relationships that are going to be coming together, and they can be very good, but each party has their own interests. And talk a little bit about how to navigate that while protecting your interests, but also building the relationship.
It may sound cliche, but in a relationship, any type of relationship, you're looking for shared wins. That's what we like to call it. So it's, begin with the end in mind, a Stephen Covey principle, but find what the mutual interest is, what's going to be, as I like to say, accretive for both parties. And then make cerebral contracts. It's what I write about in one of my books. Make a cerebral contract up front. So, Pete, am I understanding that this is what you want out of this? This is what I want out of this. Let's work together to make that happen. And you know what? Let's over-communicate on the way there. Right. That's how we can ensure most of the time that we don't end up in conflict that breaks apart the relationship. Even though there's going to be some uneasiness, it's part of being human. Right?
That's awesome. Okay, so tell us about a client and how you've helped them succeed and build relationships.
Well, we have a thing that we call entrepreneurial relationship triage. Okay, and that's really what Ideashares does. I mean, we get to meet people in the very early stages of ideation, and one of the cases actually is what ended up in this book, in an incredible company that took place, where I met a gentleman who was the first ever Disney Service Excellence Coordinator, and he had some ideas, but really needed to build a brand, a larger value proposition, and it needed ambassadors. And so that's what we do. I was his Sherpa, and we don't have time for it today, but that's what we do at Ideashares.com is we will Sherpa people, giving them a virtual COO, if you will, during that early stage of entrepreneurial triage to help them have the relationships and the resources to get to that minimally viable product, proof of concept. And that's what we did with this gentleman named Bruce Leffler. And the funny thing was, I took a real interest interested in this business, not just as a Sherpa or as a mentor, but also as an eventual owner and investor in the company. And so not only are they an Ideashares portfolio company, I'm also really one of the co-founders of where it moved into. And so we wrote a book together called The Experiences, which was the
we'll
5 principles of Disney service and relationship excellence. But during that triage period, I think where the real successes come in is we've recently named Danielle Torres CEO of the company, and part of what we do sometimes is finding that C-suite and the resources and the people, the human capital that's going to be out there. And Danielle, over the last 6 months, has taken this company to an entire new level. And what they do, they're experienced architects, and so they use training and facilitation and analytics and data to be able to help people create a foundation around their employee or patient experience. And but if it wasn't for us first connecting on a relational level, and then helping Bruce and then Danielle and other people part of the organization through that relational entrepreneurial triage, if you will, creating that relational momentum, it never would have happened. And that's kind of the secret of what we do and the secret of those relationships, right? It's about inertia at the end of the day.
Brian, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back.